In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, beneath the splendor of marble temples and the roar of the Senate, a darker economy thrived in silence, the slave market. And within that human commerce, one group endured a fate both troubling and largely forgotten. Enslaved boys, trafficked not for labor or war, but for roles within elite private households. The slave markets operated daily, with human merchandise arriving from all corners of the expanding empire. Merchants specialized in particular types of slaves, with some focusing exclusively on young boys prized for their appearance and perceived refinement. The journey to the slave market was often brutal. Boys taken as spoils of war might have witnessed the destruction of their cities and deaths of their families. Those sold by impoverished parents endured the heartbreak of separation and the uncertainty of their fate. During transport to Rome, they were typically chained and housed in cramped conditions aboard ships or in merchant caravans. Upon arrival, they were cleaned, fed better rations, and taught basic Latin phrases to increase their value to potential buyers. What would it mean to be a delicatus, a term the Romans used for a favored young male slave, often selected for his refined appearance and demeanor? To the crowd in the Forum or the elite circles of Palatine Hill, these boys were viewed as property, no different than furniture or livestock. The concept of pueri delicati, delicate boys, reflected Roman aesthetic values that prized youthfulness, grace, and androgynous beauty. These standards were influenced by Greek ideals but took on distinct Roman characteristics, emphasizing subservience and availability. Public auctions were held in locations like the Forum Boarium, near the Tiber River, where enslaved individuals stood on platforms with placards listing their origin, skills, and physical condition. Young boys, often Greek, Thracian, Syrian, or Phrygian, were valued for their refinement and appearance, their price determined by perceived elegance and potential. Some were taken as spoils of war, others were sold by impoverished families in the provinces. The Roman satirist Juvenal, writing in the 1st century CE, mocked the elite's excesses, declaring, "A curly-haired boy costs more than a farm." His words exposed not just indulgence, but the empire's moral contradictions, where human lives were traded alongside cattle and grain. The valuation process was meticulous. Buyers examined teeth, assessed posture and gait, and evaluated features against prevailing beauty standards. Boys with light skin, curly hair, and delicate features commanded the highest prices. Some merchants provided basic training in music, service etiquette, or reading to increase a boy's value. The most expensive could cost hundreds of thousands of sesterces, more than many Romans would earn in a lifetime. The Roman Empire did not merely tolerate this system, it institutionalized it. The buying and selling of enslaved boys for household service was neither rare nor secret. It was part of the luxury economy of the imperial elite, and yet this was only the beginning. For the most highly valued among them, the situation intensified, because for the emperor's household, ownership was not enough. Control had to be absolute. The imperial court set trends that were eagerly adopted by wealthy families across the empire, creating sustained demand for these enslaved youths. To the Roman elite, power was not merely exercised through conquest and law, it extended into every aspect of life, including the domination of enslaved individuals within the imperial household. Nowhere was this more evident than in the use of eunuchs in the Roman court. Enslaved boys and young men whose altered status symbolized submission, hierarchy, and exclusivity. Within the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, eunuchs known as spadones served as slaves to emperors and nobles. These were not isolated practices, but reflected Rome's complex relationship with Eastern customs. Though Roman writers often criticized eunuchs as symbols of Eastern effeminacy, the elite continued to employ them, particularly those from Parthia and Asia Minor, highlighting the contradictions within Roman cultural ideals. Historical records suggest that castration, though technically illegal under the Lex Cornelia, was at times carried out to preserve certain physical traits favored in elite circles. While Roman medical texts avoid describing the procedure in detail, later sources refer to painful and dangerous methods. Many enslaved individuals reportedly suffered severe consequences due to the lack of effective medical care. The contradiction in Roman law is striking. While castration was formally banned, enforcement was inconsistent, especially when elite households were involved. As the empire expanded, so did this contradiction. Enslaved boys from regions like Cappadocia, Galatia, and Syria were brought into Rome and became symbols of wealth and imperial reach. Inside the imperial household, these enslaved youths were stripped of autonomy and subjected to constant control. Their altered status ensured dependence and removed any possibility of disrupting lineage or social order, key concerns of the Roman aristocracy. This practice, though rarely acknowledged openly, functioned as a calculated tool for preserving elite power. Yet for many of these enslaved individuals, life within the emperor's private sphere remained one of ritual, limitation, and unrecognized service. Stripped of freedom, family, and personal agency, many enslaved boys in ancient Rome were absorbed into the private spheres of the imperial elite, rarely emerging again with an identity of their own. One of the most notable examples was Sporus, an enslaved youth reportedly brought into Emperor Nero's inner circle. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, Nero arranged for Sporus to undergo a physical alteration, dressed him in women's garments, and held a public ceremony in which he referred to him as his wife. Sporus accompanied Nero in public, sat beside him at events, and resided in the imperial household. The emperor reportedly called him Sabina, echoing the name of his deceased spouse. Historians interpret this act not as affection, but as a demonstration of theatrical control and imperial excess. But Sporus was not alone. Roman sources refer to others, delicati, spardo and pueri delicati, enslaved youths selected for their appearance and assigned to perform refined roles within elite settings. These boys were often trained in music, poetry, and dance. They poured wine at banquets, attended to guests in bathhouses, and entertained with rehearsed performances. Their grace and discipline were praised, though their names were rarely remembered. Roman poets like Martial and Catullus reference such slaves in passing, sometimes critically, sometimes with admiration. Yet behind the luxury, there was hardship. The court was a place marked by political intrigue, favoritism, and sudden shifts in fortune. If a slave fell out of favor, or worse, was seen as disloyal, they could be beaten, imprisoned, or killed without consequence. Suetonius recounts that under Emperor Tiberius, the villa at Capri became associated with troubling rumors. While such accounts may carry political bias, the consistency of these reports across sources suggests real concerns about abuse of power. What made their lives especially tragic was the paradox of high visibility and complete voicelessness. These enslaved youths were displayed as symbols of wealth and refinement, but held no true agency. They could reside in marble halls and sleep on golden couches, yet remained under strict control. Roman society, deeply concerned with status and image, viewed their condition not as a flaw, but as a reflection of elite privilege. To be such a slave in the Roman Empire was to live near the seat of power, but to remain powerless. Admired and utilized, yet never truly free, their lives were carefully crafted performances designed to reflect the values of a society that saw elegance and domination as inseparable. For those who survived to adulthood, the future was uncertain. Some might be granted freedom, though this often came with ongoing obligations to their former masters. Others might be passed down to heirs or sold again as they lost the youthful qualities that made them valuable. Few would ever reunite with their families of origin or return to their homelands. Their experiences, though largely unrecorded in their own words, offer a window into the complex realities of Roman slavery, beyond the familiar narratives of gladiators and agricultural workers. Rome's commerce in enslaved boys revealed an empire where refinement concealed exploitation, and political supremacy was enforced through control over human lives. Practices such as physical alteration, public display, and forced obedience reshaped the dynamics of courtly power, and still serve as warnings today of how unchecked authority can deform the human condition. Their fate reminds us that even the most sophisticated societies can hide cruelty behind art, law, and ritual. The silent history of these boys challenges idealized visions of Rome, forcing us to confront the human cost of imperial grandeur and the complex ways in which systems of power manipulate and commodify human beings. How might the muted testimonies of these eunuchs revise your view of Roman greatness? The question extends beyond historical curiosity to how we understand the relationship between cultural achievement and human rights in any society. As Juvenal asked, "Quis custodiet ipsos custodes?" Who will guard the guards themselves? A question that resonates through the centuries as we continue to examine systems of power and their impact on the most vulnerable. The story of these enslaved boys represents not just a historical footnote, but an essential chapter in understanding the full complexity of Roman society and the enduring patterns of exploitation that persist in various forms throughout human history.